Hello everyone, bringing you the Mannequin of the Month for July 2022 today. The topic chosen via the poll over on Patreon was a Royal Navy gunnery rating serving in home waters circa 1941. So that's what we've got set up on the Mannequin here. So getting the jumper on the Mannequin is a little bit difficult. I've had to actually shave the polystyrene down on this a little bit more to get it to fit, because you have to be able to pull the waist over the chest in order for this to fit. It's an over the head garment. There's no buttons or zip or anything. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but worth doing because it's nice to have the Royal Navy kit on display again for a change. We start at the top as we normally do. We have here a Mark II steel helmet. This has been finished in grey paint, suggesting it's been repainted. My understanding is when these were initially delivered to the RN, along with the RAF, they were in the same drab paint as those produced for the Army, and this one has therefore been repainted using RN grey paint. They did need fairly regular repainting because in the sea air you can actually see some rust and so forth. If they were dinged, they are partly worn as a crash helmet, particularly when working inside gun mounts and so forth. You can quite easily knock your head and that will chip the paint, and you can see rust coming in here, so it does need another repaint, this one. That's worn obviously to give protection to the head, as mentioned, as a crash helmet, quite apart from any protection from shrapnel and so forth. Underneath that we have an anti-flash hood, and we'll get a detailed look at this now. I'll just remove the helmet. So you can see the anti-flash hood here. This does not have the gauze over the nose and mouth, which would be introduced a little bit later on during the war, initially as a separate piece that could be worn with this, and then latterly incorporated into the design of the anti-flash hood. And basically that would set the pattern for anti-flash right the way through to the modern day. We next have the Sailor's Class 2 uniform, the basic Class 2 uniform. There are three classes of ratings, or there were three classes of ratings in the Royal Navy at the time: Class 1, Class 2 and Class 3. Class 2 was sometimes referred to as men dressed as seamen. That is to say, men wearing what's colloquially referred to as square rig, which is what we have here, the sailor's jumper, collar and so on. Classes 1 and 3 wore jackets, 6-button jackets as number 1, and then latterly a working jacket with just 4 or 3 buttons down the front. As a working uniform. That's something we might cover in future videos. But this is the Class 2 uniform, and it depending what branch you were in, and then obviously your rate as well, would determine what type of uniform you would wear. In this instance, it's Class 2 for a gunnery rating below confirmed petty officer. We have the collar here, the seaman's collar. A lot of apocryphal stories about this, about what the 3 stripes mean and so forth. That's just a stylistic element of the uniform. It's made of jean, so it's made of a very fine denim type material. These often faded down, and a little bit of social history of the RN. At the time, it was quite common for men to scrub these, try and fade them down to show they'd been serving a little bit longer. We have quite a dark blue one here that's retained its colour quite well. We have the silk, which comes down the front here, and this is tied at the front with a bow, as you can see there. The jumper itself is made of a very dark blue serge material, the same wool serge material, the same weave as that used for battle dress uniform in the RAF's service dress as well. So wearing a Class 2 uniform like this as a working uniform was becoming a rarity by this point. As the war progressed, it became more and more common for men to wear overalls, so 1-piece overalls or 2-piece overalls when engaged in such activities, and as a general working uniform. Prior to the war, the action working dress, what would become action working dress, the pale blue shirt with the darker blue trousers, that was introduced post-war. It's actually been discussed. It had been proposed as a new uniform pre-war and wasn't introduced until the very latter days, or on a trials basis, the very latter days of the Second World War. So in some instances, this remained a working uniform. You'll see as we move this round, the badges and so forth are a bit scruffy. This is a jumper that would have been worn for a while. It's not worn out, but it's beginning to become worn. The badges and so forth are beginning to become worn, so it's been downgraded to more of a working uniform and is worn for that purpose. So that's the front of the Mannequin here. We'll start to move this round now and have a look at the other details. Looking at the right hand side of the Mannequin here, starting at the top, we have the side profile of the Mark II steel helmet there. We have the collar coming down, as you can see, and then the arm of the uniform here. You'll note the prominent reversed crease. This is due to the fact that Class 2 uniform was generally pressed and folded inside out, so when worn the right way out, you end up with these distinctive reverse creases. And certainly those on the trousers, which form the sort of concertina pattern down the leg, became quite an iconic part of the uniform, and efforts were made to press those in as sharply as possible when going on leave. Forward of the reverse crease on the arm here, we have the non-substantive rating badge. Now this is for a quarters rating, second class. This is indicative of a split which had taken place in the gunnery branch just prior to the war, and this broke the gunnery branch down into specific trades related to specific operations. Gunnery was becoming more and more complex, and also with hostilities on the horizon, there was a need to break down the specific qualifications within the gunnery branch. You were going to need to train men for a specific task rather than training them more broadly in the time available. So we have a quarters rating second class here. Quarters ratings being responsible for the operation of mounts and turrets and the guns themselves, so the mechanical operation of the guns basically. The quarters rating second class is represented by the Q beneath 2 crossed guns and a star above. A single gun on its side with a Q beneath and a star above would be third class, and then a star above and below the guns with a Q then below that. Cross guns with a star above and below and a Q down here would be first class, and then the letter would change depending on the specific gunnery role you were trained for. A quarters rating second class might well be a captain of a gun on a single mount, for example on a destroyer, so a 4.5 inch gun on a destroyer by way of example, or a corvette perhaps, and that's what we have here. This is non-substantive rate, that is to say it's the trade or qualification of the rating. The substantive rate is worn on the other arm. This is essentially the rank. Going into the Second World War, there was still a lot of branches of the RN where there wasn't a very strong link between the substantive and non-substantive rates. So you could perhaps be a chief petty officer with a very low qualification in gunnery, or vice versa, you could have a very high qualification in gunnery, but you're still only an able seaman. During the course of the war, as more technical trades came in, there was a move to bring this in closer and closer alignment between substantive and non-substantive rate, and that continued post-war to the point now where your qualification in your specific trade matches very closely with your substantive rate. That was a change that was ongoing at the time. Down below on the sleeve we have the anti-flash gloves here. These are wartime examples. They're sort of elbow length, elasticated band around the elbow there, and then an elasticated section at the wrist as well. And they are made of a proofed cotton to give some obviously protection against flash and flames, so some protection from fire basically. Moving on to look at the back of the mannequin here, we can see the sailor's collar. This is worn over the collar of the serge jumper. This does actually have an integral collar. The collar would not always be worn, as the same with the silk, which we saw at the front. When in uniform like this, when basically wearing the Class 2 uniform as a working uniform, the collar and silk were sometimes omitted. In this instance, we have the collar. It's another talking point, if nothing else. We have the creases across the back here. You can see how it's been folded together, and they, again, when on leave, would be pressed in very, very sharply to add that sort of smart element to the uniform. You can see here it's this sort of denim-y colour because it is made of a jean cloth, and the thin white tape sewn on individually to make the 3 stripes around the side there. Looking at the left-hand side of the mannequin here, you can see the reverse crease coming down, and forward of that we have the substantive rate badge in this instance, a fouled anchor, as you can see there. This is for a leading rate or leading seaman, and this is roughly equivalent to corporal, much as petty officer is equivalent to sergeant. The badge underneath this, the red stripe, is nothing to do with rank. This is a good conduct badge, and at this time it represents 3 years good conduct, and that would be the same through the course of the war. I believe now, immediate post-war and up to today, it now represents 4 years good conduct, but at the time of the Second World War this represented 3 years good conduct, and that's worn directly below the substantive rate badge. You could have a maximum of 3 of these, up to confirmed petty officer. As soon as you were promoted to chief, you no longer wore them. And just by way of completeness, we have the other anti-flash glove down here, just hanging off the cuff of the uniform in this instance. Looks a little bit strange on the mannequin, but it's the best way I could display them. So that is the left-hand side of the mannequin with the substantive rate. Obviously this is the actual equivalent to, say, rank. The other badge on the other arm shows the trade and your specific qualification within that trade or branch. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. I really like RN uniform, RN kit. It's certainly of great interest to me. It's actually where I started collecting, and obviously when I had aspiration to join the military, it's where I was initially planning to go, and obviously spent my time as an officer cadet at university. So the RN is my first love when it comes to collecting militaria, and it's very nice to have this out on the mannequin for display. So thank you to those on Patreon who voted for this topic, much appreciated. If you'd like to see more of this sort of thing on the channel and you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And of course the corporal tier over on Patreon gives you the opportunity to vote on this each month. And I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who supports the channel using both PayPal and Patreon. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, where photographs of this will of course be posted up, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below in the description. And if you'd like to get in touch with me but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. But that's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.